Imagine opening a letter so powerful, so controversial, that it could rewrite everything you thought you knew about history. That's what Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to death, sent to Emperor Tiberius. In it, he didn't just talk about politics or governance. He wrote about a man, Jesus of Nazareth, who defied everything Pilate believed about power, truth, and even life itself. But this wasn't just any letter. He didn't merely report facts. He confessed his fear, awe, and confusion. He depicted Jesus in a manner that contrasts with the depictions we've seen for centuries. And the events he recounted, miracles, darkness, earthquakes, and even an empty tomb, were so extraordinary that they haunted him long after they happened. Pilate begins by describing Jesus in stunning detail. Forget the dark-haired figure from Sunday school stories. He saw a man with light brown, almost golden hair that shimmered in the sun, and piercing eyes that seemed to change between light brown and blue. His skin was radiant, smooth, and unlike anyone he had ever seen in Judea. He compares his teachings to the greatest philosophers of Rome and Greece, Socrates, Plato, but says Jesus' wisdom went beyond anything human. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, Jesus once said, silencing an angry crowd. Pilate couldn't shake the feeling that Jesus saw through him, as if he already knew the outcome of their encounter. He admits he wanted to protect Jesus, to shield him from the growing anger of Judea's religious leaders. But every time he tried, Jesus seemed to accept his fate, calmly predicting what was to come. "There will be no refuge for the Son of Man," Jesus told him, words that echoed in Pilates' mind long after their meeting. Then came the trial and crucifixion. He tried to release Jesus, but the mob demanded blood. As Jesus hung on the cross, the sky turned black, the ground shook, and a fear swept over Pilate that he couldn't explain. Days later, the empty tomb of Jesus spread whispers of his resurrection. Pilates' rule in Judea was far from easy. Tasked with enforcing Roman law in a region simmering with religious fervor and hatred for their occupiers, he found himself constantly on edge. The Jewish Sanhedrin, the religious council, was powerful, cunning, and deeply opposed to Roman interference. To them, Jesus wasn't just a preacher. He was a dangerous disruptor who openly criticized their traditions and called for spiritual change. They wanted him silenced. But he saw something different. He didn't view Jesus as a rebel, at least not in the political sense. He described him in his letter to Emperor Tiberius as a man of peace whose teachings promoted love and forgiveness, not insurrection. Jesus' words carried a wisdom he had never encountered, even among the greatest philosophers of Rome. Yet this wisdom made Jesus dangerous, not to Rome, but to his own people in power. His letter describes how he questioned Jesus, seeking any reason to save him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. Jesus' reply was cryptic, yet profound. "My kingdom is not of this world." He found no fault in him, but the crowd's fury grew louder. Fear began to creep in, fear of losing control, fear of a revolt, and perhaps fear of Jesus himself. He, desperate to absolve himself of guilt, tried one last gesture. He washed his hands before the crowd, symbolizing that he was not responsible for Jesus' fate. But as he wrote in his letter, the act brought him no peace. "The weight of my decision haunts me still," he admitted. His fear wasn't just political. As he watched Jesus walk to his death, strange things began to happen. The sky darkened. A violent earthquake trembled the ground across Judea. Pilate described seeing chaos among the people, some weeping, others screaming, and many fleeing in terror. Years of battle had shaken the hardened Roman soldiers to their core. Days later, when news reached Pilate that Jesus' tomb was empty, that fear transformed into dread. His soldiers claimed they had seen a bright light at the tomb, heard heavenly music, and felt the ground quake again. The Sanhedrin tried to cover it up, spreading rumors that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body, but Pilate wasn't convinced. In his letter, he wrote of his growing belief that what happened was beyond human explanation. The letter reveals a man torn between his duty to Rome and his conscience. He feared rebellion, but he also feared that he had sentenced an innocent or divine man to death. "If this man truly was the Son of God," Pilate wrote, "then his blood will forever stain my hands." In the heart of one of history's most turbulent moments, he faced a decision that no amount of power could make easier. As governor of Judea, his job was simple: maintain Roman law and order, no matter the cost. But when Jesus of Nazareth stood before him, calm and composed while the crowd roared for blood, Pilates' task became anything but simple. He wasn't just deciding a man's fate, he was wrestling with his own conscience, his beliefs, and a fear of consequences that reached far beyond his lifetime. Pilates' dilemma wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. On one hand, his duty to Rome demanded swift action. Judea was a volatile province, and rebellion lurked around every corner. The Jewish leaders accused Jesus of inciting unrest and blaspheming their laws. They claimed that Jesus called himself the King of the Jews, a title that directly challenged Caesar's authority. Allowing such claims to go unchecked could spark a revolt, a failure he couldn't afford. On the other hand, he wasn't convinced that Jesus was guilty of any crime deserving death. Religious disputes, not threats to Roman order, were the root of the charges brought against him. His own observations of Jesus left him conflicted. He saw no defiance, no anger, no ambition for political power. Instead, he described Jesus as a man of serenity and wisdom, someone who spoke of love and forgiveness rather than rebellion. Pilate even admitted in his letter to Emperor Tiberius that Jesus' words left him in awe, as if they carried a truth beyond human understanding. He wasn't alone in this drama. The Jewish leaders had stirred up a frenzy among the people, turning the streets of Jerusalem into a cauldron of anger and fear. They demanded crucifixion, their shouts echoing through the city. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate tried to reason with them, offering to release Jesus as part of the Passover tradition. Instead, the crowd chose Barabbas, a known criminal, over Jesus. His wife even stepped in, sending him a warning about a disturbing dream she had concerning Jesus. He begged him to avoid that righteous man, but he was unable to make a decision. Pilate, torn between the mob's demands and his own moral reservations, sought every possible way to avoid condemning Jesus. He questioned him further, but Jesus' answers only deepened Pilates' unease. Jesus said, "Unless you receive it from above, you have no power over me." It was a statement that unsettled him, forcing him to consider the possibility that this man was no ordinary teacher or prophet. But it didn't stop with darkness. The account tells of chaos spreading across Jerusalem as people fled their homes in terror. This was no small tremor. It was an earthquake strong enough to be felt in distant regions, a physical manifestation of the moment's gravity. He described it as a moment when the heavens and the earth seemed to mourn the death of the Nazarene. For a man who believed in Roman gods and the power of fate, this was a supernatural sign he couldn't explain. To understand why these events carried such weight, you need to know about the ancient prophecies Jesus fulfilled. Jewish scriptures spoke of a Messiah, one who would suffer and die for the sins of others. Texts such as Isaiah and Psalms foretold of a servant who would undergo a piercing for our transgressions, and whose death would bring salvation to the world. For those familiar with these writings, Jesus' death seemed like the ultimate realization of these ancient words. He, however, wasn't a Jew. He didn't grow up hearing these prophecies, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had just occurred. In his letter, he writes about hearing rumors from his informants and even members of the Sanhedrin, some of whom whispered that Jesus' death matched the sacred texts too perfectly to be coincidence. The days following the crucifixion brought even more unsettling events. He describes how Roman soldiers sealed and guarded Jesus' tomb, only to find it empty. Witnesses reported a blinding light at the site and strange melodic sounds that seemed to come from the heavens. The guards, hardened warriors accustomed to battle, claimed they had fainted in fear. The Sanhedrin tried to cover it up, spreading a story that Jesus' followers had stolen his body. But the soldiers told a different tale. In his letter, Pilate writes of speaking to one of the guards, who described seeing what he could only explain as the presence of the divine. The soldier confessed that he had never believed in miracles, but what he witnessed that morning changed him forever. Even more chilling were the reports from ordinary citizens. He heard stories of statues weeping, rivers turning red as if they were filled with blood, and strangers witnessing visions from miles away. These weren't isolated rumors. They came from people of all walks of life, many of whom had no connection to Jesus or his followers. Among the many accounts and narratives surrounding Jesus of Nazareth, the so-called letter of Publius Lentulus stands out as an intriguing, though controversial, document. Attributed to Publius Lentulus, an alleged Roman official who supposedly preceded Pontius Pilate as governor of Judea, this letter provides a vivid description of Jesus' physical appearance. However, many scholars today question its authenticity and view it as a medieval creation rather than a genuine historical document. The Roman Senate receives a detailed description of Jesus in the letter. The text describes Jesus as having hair the color of a ripe chestnut, a color often compared to wine or reddish-brown. People describe his hair as parted in the middle and flowing freely down his shoulders, giving him a strikingly dignified appearance. His beard, long and full, matched the color of his hair and further enhanced his regal demeanor. His face, the letter claims, was radiant and serene, exuding both authority and gentleness. The most striking detail, however, is the claim that Jesus had blue eyes, or eyes that varied between blue and grey, depending on the light. This description aligns more closely with European medieval iconography than with the physical characteristics of people native to Judea during the 1st century. His eyes, the letter continues, were piercing yet full of love, a quality that purportedly made those who met his gaze feel both understood and humbled. The letter also emphasizes Jesus' physical stature, describing him as taller than most of his contemporaries, with an imposing presence that made him stand out in any crowd. People described his movements as deliberate and his speech as calm, measured, and profound. These descriptions depict not just a man, but a figure of almost divine perfection, matching the medieval ideal of how the Son of God should appear. Despite the captivating imagery, the authenticity of the letter of Publius Lentulus is highly suspect. No historical records from the Roman era mention a Publius Lentulus serving as a governor in Judea. Furthermore, the letter's language and style bear hallmarks of medieval Latin rather than the concise, bureaucratic tone characteristic of Roman administrative texts. Scholars have identified anachronisms in the letter, such as the use of descriptive elements more consistent with medieval European portrayals of Christ than with 1st century Judean culture. The letter first emerged in the Middle Ages, a time when relics, stories, and other artifacts related to Jesus and early Christianity were in high demand. A predominantly European Christian audience, eager for a tangible depiction of their Savior, likely created it to satisfy their curiosity. The description's inclusion of blue eyes and fair features reflects the biases and cultural influences of medieval Europe, where local aesthetics, not historical accuracy, shaped artistic depictions of Jesus. Despite its lack of authenticity, the letter of Publius Lentulus has influenced artistic and cultural representations of Jesus over the centuries. If you are enjoying this story, consider clicking the Super Thanks button. By doing so, you're ensuring we can keep uncovering, exploring, and sharing meaningful stories that inspire reflection and discovery. Renaissance and Baroque art, in particular, often depicted Jesus with features similar to those described in the letter: flowing hair, serene expressions, and European facial features. These depictions became iconic, shaping the way millions envision Jesus even today. The story of Jesus and the events surrounding his trial, crucifixion, and resurrection is more than a tale of historical intrigue. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest struggles and highest aspirations. It is a story of power colliding with truth, of fear confronting faith, and of mortal decisions echoing into eternity. Whether through the accounts of Pilates' inner turmoil, the cultural clashes of Judea, or the supernatural phenomena that defied explanation, this narrative continues to resonate because it speaks to universal themes that transcend time. For believers, it is a testament to the divine breaking into the human experience, an act of love and sacrifice that forever altered the course of history. For historians, it is a lens through which to examine the interplay of politics, culture, and belief in a world on the brink of transformation. And for all, it is a reminder that the choices we make, whether motivated by fear, conviction, or duty, have consequences far beyond our immediate understanding. Thanks for watching. Join our community by subscribing to the channel. See you in the next video.